Welcome to the channel, everyone. I hope you enjoy the stories, and thank you for listening. My name's Kevin Blake, and I'm a long-haul trucker out of Billings, Montana. Been driving rigs for close to 15 years now, seen all kinds of things out there on the road, stormy nights, drunk drivers, coyotes skulking by the highway, but nothing comes close to what happened on that haul through the backwoods of Kentucky. It was late October, crisp with the chill of an early winter creeping in. I'd picked up a load of construction equipment from Louisville, headed to a site outside Knoxville. I had the route all planned, mostly major highways, but an accident on I-65 forced me onto some back roads. That's where things started to feel wrong. The detour took me through a stretch of dense forest, the kind that looks like it could swallow the sun whole. The road was narrow, winding and barely lit, with only the occasional flicker of my headlights glancing off the trunks of gnarled old oaks. I tried tuning into the radio, but all I got was static. It was just me, the hum of the engine, and the dark. I noticed the first odd thing about 40 miles into the detour. Something big darted across the road, quick as a flash, just ahead of my rig. At first I thought it might be a deer, but it moved differently. Too fast, and its silhouette seemed wrong. It had this hunched over look, like it was on all fours but could easily stand upright. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the shadows playing tricks on me, but that uneasy feeling stuck around. About an hour later, I pulled over at a rest stop, a small forgotten thing tucked into the woods. It was barely more than a gravel lot and a pair of flickering fluorescent lights over a dingy restroom. I stepped out to stretch my legs, the cold air biting through my jacket. That's when I noticed the silence. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just the distant hum of my truck's engine and the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard it. A low guttural growl. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. It came from somewhere in the woods, deep and resonant, like the sound of a bear, but not quite. I froze, scanning the tree line. My flashlight caught the glint of eyeshine, a pair of yellow orbs reflecting back at me from the shadows. They were too high off the ground to be an animal, but too wide set to be human. I climbed back into my cab and locked the doors, my heart pounding. Whatever it was, I didn't want to find out. I put the truck in gear and got out of there. The road wound deeper into the woods, and the sense of being watched grew unbearable. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of movement in my side mirrors, a dark shape keeping pace with the truck. I tried to focus on the road, but my eyes kept darting to the mirrors, searching for whatever was out there. And then it happened. Out of nowhere, something massive slammed into the side of the trailer. The whole rig shook, the steering wheel jerking in my hands. I fought to keep control, my tires skidding on the narrow road. My heart raced as I glanced in the side mirrors again. This time, I saw it clearly. It was enormous, 7 or 8 feet tall, covered in matted black fur. Its head was canine, like a wolf, but its body was twisted and grotesque, with broad shoulders and long, sinewy limbs. It ran on 2 legs, but its gait was uneven, almost sloping. Its yellow eyes locked onto mine, and I swear it grinned, bearing a set of jagged yellow teeth. I floored it, my engine roaring as I pushed the truck to its limits. The creature kept pace, its claws scraping against the side of the trailer. I grabbed my CB radio and called out, hoping someone might be close enough to hear. "Breaker, breaker, this is Long Haul 67. I need help. Something's chasing me. Big as hell, looks like a damn wolf, but it's on 2 legs. Anyone out there?" Only static replied. The creature made another lunge, this time clawing at the cab. I heard the screech of metal and saw deep gashes on my door. My adrenaline spiked, and I swerved, trying to shake it off. It stumbled but didn't fall, its claws leaving marks in the asphalt as it regained its footing. Up ahead, I saw a faint light, a gas station, my only chance. I barreled into the lot, slamming on the brakes and bringing the rig to a screeching halt. The place was deserted, but the lights were on. I jumped out, grabbing the tire iron I kept under the seat, and ran for the door. I barely made it inside before the creature appeared at the edge of the lot. It stood there, just beyond the reach of the lights, its eyes glowing like embers. It didn't charge this time. Instead, it circled, its massive frame blending into the shadows. I locked the door and backed away, my hands shaking. Hours passed, the creature didn't leave. It just prowled around the gas station, its low growls vibrating through the walls. I could hear its claws scraping against the windows, testing the glass. I stayed huddled behind the counter, clutching the tire iron like it was the only thing keeping me alive. When dawn finally broke, the creature was gone. I stepped outside, the morning light revealing the damage. My trailer was shredded, deep claw marks gouged into the metal. The asphalt was torn up while it had chased me, but there was no sign of it, no tracks, no blood, nothing. I finished the haul, but I've never taken this route again. I don't know what it was, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget those yellow eyes. My name is Danny Haynes. I'm a trucker out of Mobile, Alabama, and I've been in this line of work long enough to know that sometimes the road doesn't play fair. You'll find yourself in a snowstorm in the middle of April or stuck with a flat tire in a town no one's heard of. But nothing in my years on the highway prepared me for what I saw on that stretch of road near Rhinelander, Wisconsin. It was the middle of December, and I had a long haul lined up, transporting industrial equipment from Green Bay down to Minneapolis. The pay was good, and I was used to icy conditions. My rig, a reliable freightliner I'd named Old Betty, handled the cold like a champ, and I thought this trip would be just another notch in the logbook. The first few hours were uneventful. Snow flurries danced across the windshield, and the road stretched out like a ribbon of black ink, flanked by towering pines dusted white. I'd taken a shortcut off Highway 29 to shave off some time off my trip. The GPS marked it as a county road, but it was well maintained, and traffic was almost non-existent. It was perfect, at least until the sun dipped below the horizon. Twilight turned the snow-covered trees into shadows that seemed to lean closer to the road. I flipped on my high beams, their glow cutting through the darkness but not quite reaching the depths of the forest on either side. That's when the unease began. It started with a noise, faint at first, like a low hum. I thought it might be the kind of whistling through the gaps in the trailer, but as the miles passed it grew louder. It wasn't the wind, it was a growl, deep and guttural, rising and falling like something pacing me just out of sight. I shook it off. "Get a grip, Danny," I muttered, focusing on the road, but the growling didn't stop. If anything, it grew closer. Then out of nowhere, something darted across the road so fast I barely had time to hit the brakes. My tires screeched against the icy pavement, and old Betty fishtailed for a heart-stopping second before I managed to get her under control. My headlights caught the briefest glimpse of it, a hulking black furred figure moving on all fours, but with a gait that wasn't quite right. It disappeared into the trees before I could get a good look. My pulse hammered as I pulled over to the shoulder. I got out, flashlight in hand, the frigid air biting through my jacket. The forest was silent, except for the crunch of snow under my boots. No birds, no wind, just an oppressive heavy stillness. I shone the light into the woods, but saw nothing. No tracks, no broken branches. It was like whatever I'd seen had evaporated into thin air. I climbed back into the cab, locking the doors behind me, and pressing on. About an hour later, the growling returned. This time it was louder, closer, vibrating through the cab like it was coming from inside the truck. My grip tightened on the wheel, my eyes darting to the mirrors, and that's when I saw it. Running alongside the rig, just beyond the reach of my headlights, was the thing I'd seen earlier, but now I could make out the details. It wasn't an animal, not entirely. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with a body that seemed to shift between running on 2 legs and 4. Its fur matted and black as pitch, and its head was all wrong. It had the snout of a wolf, but its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, looked onto me with an intelligence that chilled me to the core. I floored it, the engine roaring as I pushed old Betty as fast as she'd go. But the creature didn't fall behind, it kept pace, leaping effortlessly over the snowdrifts that lined the road. At one point, it lunged at the trailer, its claws raking across the metal with a sound that made my teeth ache. I grabbed the CB radio, my voice shaking as I called out, "Breaker, breaker, this is Danny Hayes. I've got something chasing me. Big, fast, not human. Anyone out there? Over." Static. Then a garbled voice crackled through. "Get off that road, driver, now!" That was it. No explanation, no advice, just a warning, but I didn't need to be told twice. I spotted a turnout up ahead and made a split-second decision, swerving onto the snow-packed side road. The creature followed, its yellow eyes burning in my side mirror. The turnout led to a small clearing, barely large enough to park the rig. I killed the engine, grabbed my tire iron and climbed out, the cold air burning my lungs. The forest around me was deathly silent again, but I could feel it watching. I turned in slow circles, tire iron in one hand, flashlight in the other, my breath fogging the air. Then I heard it, a low guttural growl, so close it made my hairs on my neck stand on end. It stepped into the clearing, its form fully illuminated by the moonlight. It was even bigger than I thought, its shoulders broad enough to block out the trees behind it, its claws glinting like steel, and its mouth curled into a snarl that revealed teeth sharp enough to cut through bone. I don't remember much after that. I swung the tire iron as it lunged, its claws slicing through the air inches from my face. Somehow I managed to scramble back into the cab and lock the doors just as it slammed into the side of the truck. The rig rocked violently, but the doors held. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline, listening to the thing growl and snarl outside. Eventually the noises stopped. When I finally worked up the courage to look, the clearing was empty. I made it to Minneapolis the next morning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched the entire way. When I dropped off the load, I inspected the trailer. The claw marks were still there, deep and jagged, like scars on the metal. I've heard stories about Dogman before, mostly from late-night truck stop conversations and crackpot radio shows, but now I'm a believer. Whatever's out there in those woods, it's real, and it's hungry. The name's Carl Hendricks. I've been a trucker out of Knoxville, Tennessee for the better part of 15 years now. I've seen my share of weird things on the road, eerie hitchhikers, abandoned cars with their doors wide open, and lights in the sky that didn't make any sense. But nothing comes close to what happened that night on a forgotten stretch of Route 34 in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was late February, and I had a heavy load of steel beams headed for a construction site in Green Bay. The kind of job that paid well but came with long, lonely hours on the road. I didn't mind. I liked the solitude, the hum of the engine, and the way the miles melted under my wheels. It was just me and my rig, Ruby, a red Peterbilt that I'd been driving for a decade. She was reliable, and on those desolate roads, reliability was everything. The snow had started falling just as I crossed into Michigan. Big, wet flakes that clung to the windshield no matter how fast the wipers went. The road was a narrow two-lane cutting through dense forest that seemed to go on forever. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour, just the reflection of my headlights bouncing off the snow-covered trees. Around 11 p.m., I spotted a gas station up ahead. It was one of those old mom and pop places with a single pump and a flickering neon sign. I pulled into the top of the tank and grabbed a coffee. The place was deserted, but the lights were on, and the door creaked open when I pushed it. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and old wood. An older guy behind the counter looked up from his magazine and gave me a nod. His name tag said Ed. "Rough night for driving," he said, as I paid for my coffee. His voice was gravely, like he'd smoked 2 packs a day for 30 years. "Yeah, but it beats sitting at home," I replied. He chuckled, but there was something off about it, like he knew something I didn't. As I turned to leave, he called after me. "If you're headed down Route 34, keep an eye out. Strange things happen out there." I paused, one hand on the door. "What kind of strange things?" He shrugged. "Just strange. Be careful." I didn't think much of it at the time, but people in these small towns love their ghost stories, and truck stops are full of tall tales. I climbed back into Ruby and got back on the road. The snow was coming down harder now, and the wind had picked up, howling through the trees like some wild animal. The road was barely visible under the blanket of white, and I had to slow down to a crawl to keep from sliding off into the ditch. My headlights illuminated the swirling snow, creating a hypnotic effect that made it hard to focus. Then I saw it. Something darted across the road about 50 yards ahead, so fast I barely had time to register it. It was big, maybe the size of a deer, but it moved wrong, too fluid, too deliberate. I slammed on the brakes and Ruby groaned as she came to a stop. I sat there for a moment, heart pounding, staring into the darkness beyond the headlights. The forest on either side of the road was silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you and makes your ears ring. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, but there was nothing there. Just as I started to ease off the brakes, the growl came, low and deep, like a dog's, but so much more than that. It vibrated through the cab, through me, and sent a chill down my spine. I turned my head to the left, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the ditch, half hidden by the trees, was a figure. It was tall, easily 7 feet, and covered in black fur that seemed to absorb the light from the headlights. Its body was humanoid, with broad shoulders and long muscular arms that ended in clawed hands. But the head was pure nightmare. It was the head of a wolf, with pointed ears, a long snout, and glowing yellow eyes that locked onto me with an intelligence that made my stomach churn. It stepped forward, out of the shadows, and onto the edge of the road. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I could feel my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This wasn't some animal, this was something else, something wrong. I don't know what made me do it, but I slammed on the horn. The sound shattered the silence, loud and jarring, and for a moment the creature froze. Then it snarled, baring teeth that looked like they could crush bone, and lunged at the truck. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I threw Ruby into gear and hit the gas. The tires spun on the icy road before catching, and the rig lurched forward. I kept my eyes on the road, but in the side mirror I saw it running after me, keeping pace with the truck like it was nothing. It slammed into the side of the trailer, the impact rattling through the cab. I swerved, trying to shake it off, but it kept coming. I could hear its claws scraping against the metal, its growls mingling with the roar of the engine. My knuckles were white on the wheel, and I was shouting, though I couldn't hear my own voice over the noise. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the lights of a small town up ahead. The creature must have seen them too, because it let out one last bone-chilling howl before disappearing back into the trees. I didn't stop until I reached the town's main street, parking Ruby under the bright lights of a diner. I stumbled inside, shaking and pale, and ordered the coffee. The waitress gave me a concerned look, but didn't say anything. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. That night I stayed in a cheap motel, the trailer's claw marks still fresh and visible in the parking lot. I've been back on the road since then, but I avoid Route 34 like the plague. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, waiting, watching, and every time I hear a growl or a howl in the distance, I wonder if it's come back for me. My name is Todd McAllister, a trucker out of Wichita, Kansas. I spent the better part of 2 decades driving 18-wheelers through the winding highways and back roads of this country. You learn a lot on the road, how to read a storm by the sky, how to keep yourself awake through the dead of night, and how to tell the difference between what's real and what's just your tired mind playing tricks on you. I thought I knew the difference. That was before I hauled the load through Hell's Ridge, Pennsylvania. It was a late October evening, and I'd been tasked with delivering a massive load of timber to a mill near Altoona. The name of the route, Hell's Ridge, should have been enough of a warning, but I'd been through it once before. It was isolated and poorly lit, but I'd chalked up this ominous name to local folklore. I wasn't the superstitious type. The day had been uneventful, just miles of rolling hills and a canopy of autumn leaves that seemed to stretch forever. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the golden hues faded to a deep gray. Fog rolled in, thick and clinging to the road like some living thing. The air grew colder, and the scent of damp earth filled the cab. I flipped on the high beams as the road narrowed and twisted into dense forest. The fog swallowed the light, leaving me with just a few feet of visibility. Every now and then a shape would dart out of the corner of my eye. A fox or a raccoon, I figured. Nothing unusual, but the unease in my chest grew heavier with every mile. Somewhere around midnight, the radio cut out. Static hissed through the speakers, loud and grating. I fiddled with the dial hoping to catch a signal, but all I got was a faint, warbling noise. It sounded like a voice, distorted and distant, but I couldn't make out the words. A chill ran down my spine. I turned it off. It was then that I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, owls, and even the rustling of leaves were gone. All I could hear was the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on the gravelly road. Up ahead, something caught my eye. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, partially obscured by the fog. At first I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer, I realized it was upright, tall, and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. My stomach twisted. I hit the horn, hoping to scare it off, but it didn't move. It just stood there, its head tilted, watching. I kept driving, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I glanced in the mirror, the figure was gone. About a mile down the road, my headlights illuminated something lying in the middle of the road. A deer, or what was left of one. Its body was torn open, entrails spilling onto the asphalt. Deep gouges marred the surrounding area, as if something had dragged its hair. My foot hesitated on the brake, but I couldn't afford to stop. I swerved around the carcass and kept going, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That's when I heard it, a low guttural growl so deep it seemed to vibrate the cab. I glanced at the passenger side window and froze. Something was running alongside the truck. It was massive, easily as tall as the window, covered in black fur that rippled as it moved. Its head was unmistakably canine, with a long snout and ears that tapered into sharp points. But its eyes, those glowing amber eyes, were anything but animal. They stared straight at me, intelligent and malevolent. I slammed on the gas, Ruby roaring as she picked up speed. The creature didn't falter. It kept pace with ease, its claws scraping against the side of the trailer. I could hear the metal groaning under the pressure. I reached for the tire iron I kept wedged beside the seat, but before I could grab it, the thing lunged at the cab. The windshield spider-webbed under the force of the impact. I screamed, swerving wildly. The truck veered off the road, the trailer fishtailing behind me. Somehow, I managed to regain control, but the creature had vanished. Breathing hard, I pulled over to the side of the road. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing against the windows. My heart was racing, and my hands trembling as I reached for my phone. No signal, of course. I climbed out of the cab, tire iron in hand, and inspected the damage. Deep claw marks scored the side of the trailer, and the windshield was cracked, almost beyond repair. My breath puffed in the cold air as I circled the truck, scanning the tree line. The fog and darkness made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling snarl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My chest tightened as the sound grew closer. I turned, swinging the tire iron wildly, but there was nothing there, just shadows. The growl turned into a howl, long and mournful, echoing through the forest. It was joined by another, and then another. They were circling me. I didn't wait to find out how many there were. I bolted back to the cab, slamming the door behind me. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, the tires spinning on the icy road before catching. The howls followed me, growing fainter as I sped away, but they didn't stop. By the time I reached the truck stop on the outskirts of Altoona, the first light of dawn was breaking through the fog. My hands were still shaking as I parked and stumbled into the diner. The waitress gave me a concerned look, but I waved her off. Ordering a coffee, I could barely hold. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Who would believe me? But I couldn't shake the feeling that those amber eyes were still watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to venture down Hell's Ridge. And every time I hear a howl in the distance, I wonder if I'll ever escape the nightmare of that night. Thank you for listening, everyone. Have a good night.